Hey, good morning. It's Tom Llewellyn with Civil, and hey, recipes for everything, right? Pesto. What the hell does pesto have to do with economics or GDP or anything, right? Uh, well, everything. We'll get to that in a minute. But, I was just thinking the other day, my wife and I were listening to a book called The History of the World in Six Glasses, and it's about beverages throughout history. And the first one he talks about is beer, right? And I think beer is one of these recent things, maybe a few hundred years back to mead or whatever in Europe. And I was shocked and stunned to find out it was invented, well, it wasn't invented, it was accidentally discovered, I think like most recipes are, in Egypt thousands of years ago when some grain got left in some sort of vessel and it fermented. And somebody drank it and said, fizzy. And he was fuzzy, so fizzy and fuzzy, hey, nice buzz, this is pretty good, let's do more of that. In fact, they paid the people that built the pyramids in bread and this beer, this, very weak beer, obviously. In fact, they used to call it liquid bread because it's just grain, right, with water. Anyway, so it got me wondering about pesto. I'm thinking, maybe it goes back that far as well. Well, pesto only goes back to about maybe 1600 when it's kind of a recipe that we see today is what we see is kind of what they used, right? But it goes back even farther. When you think of all the experimentation, and again, go to economics, it's all about people experimenting, trying to figure out how stuff works, right? It's not easy, right? But it goes back to something, I think it's called morito, something like that, but it's ground spices, ricotta cheese, etc. But that was kind of the predecessor. You kind of wonder, it's like, well, what kind of preceded people to go, well, maybe I should start grinding things. Pesto comes from pesto. It's grinder, right? If you've heard of, well, anyway, don't worry about it. It's grinding anyway. So, but how many centuries before that were people grinding stuff to try to make stuff taste better? You could see old mama in the kitchen in Italy going, let's see what else we can throw in here, right? Somewhere along the line, out of thousands and thousands of tries, pesto, right? Yum. I mean, it is, for me, it's the elixir of the gods. You add pesto to most things. You can't add it to some stuff, but a ham sandwich with pesto just doesn't strike me as something it's very tasty. Might be, you never know. But man, there's many recipes that I can stick it in. I do, and it's pretty delightful. So what is it, right? So basil, fresh basil. Now I would recommend not growing basil in the desert when it's 116 degrees. Although this came out of the garden, it was kind of like, it's not exactly the way it should look. In the fall, it starts to look better. But basil, Parmesan, pine nuts, a little olive oil, don't use cooking oil, and garlic. And let's just face it, even when you can measure them out in exact things and say, do this amount and this, like recipes and you see in a cookbook. I never do any of that stuff. I love to experiment, so I'm always add a little more of one thing or another and see what's going on. In fact, recently, what did I not have? I didn't have any garlic, and I said, I'll make it anyway. Not particularly good, right? Not particularly good. If you only have a couple of basil leaves, with all the other stuff, it's not going to taste very good. So, I got to get them in some assemblage of proportion that tastes good. But you got to experiment. Same thing's going on in economics. I wish there were laws that were true and false. Simply not true. There's so many variables. If you looked at an economy, it doesn't have just 5 variables like GDP or pesto. It's got 25 or more easily, and they all affect each other. And if you tweak one the wrong way, it kind of upsets things somewhere else. So you got to do stuff. So, but what happens? So how does this compare to, let's say, GDP, right? So GDP, you remember GDP? I never want you to forget, I'm going to repeat it all the time, right? So GDP, consumption, everything we buy, investment, buildings, equipment, new stuff, right? Not old stuff, new stuff, government spending, right? Imports minus exports. So they kind of have all similarities. So if you look at imports minus exports, if you take oil out the olive oil out completely, or go negative, find a way to extract it from the other stuff as well. It's really, really awful. So you want to get a balance on imports and exports. Garlic, I don't know. Government spending is kind of like Parmesan, right? You get way too much of it and it's just going to taste like crap. And trust me, it does. Basil is like, I don't know, it's like consumption. You want a lot of it, but if the whole economy is based on consumption, things begin to fall apart. So you want to get a pretty good balance there. But the elixir is investment, right? Pine nuts. Pine nuts, without pine nuts, this thing goes bust, right? I mean, completely. It doesn't just taste bad, it tastes like crap. So, but this gives it the magical flavor, I think. And without that, like private investment, economies don't work. Can you do too much? Either pine nuts or investment? Sure. But what do you get when you add, let's say, a bunch of cheese, right? Well, you have a bunch of cheese with all the right stuff over here. The more and more cheese you add, even if you have the stuff in the same proportions that made a great pesto, it just turns into a lard, right? It's terrible. That's the way government spending is. It's not like private investment. Government spending is an investment, not by any stretch of the imagination. Almost everything the government does is unproductive, right? Just, you know, hate to say it, it's nice we're doing it in a lot of cases, like my Social Security check. It's great. You know, I like that we have Medicare and Medicaid and some of the programs and education, but at the end of the day, they don't spend the money well. So it tends just to be lard, right? It tends to be a little too cheesy, right? So whereas this, if you look at the amount of pine nuts you put in the economy, investment, it's directly connected to employment. I mean, there is a causal relationship. There is no causal relationship here. If you produce unproductive things, you just have crap, right? So look, you put all this together from a recipe point of view for, you know, whatever you're going to cook, pesto, this is great stuff. When you're putting an economy together, the same thing applies. We have to do experimentation, but when we learn something doesn't work, we need to stop doing it, right? The time I didn't put any garlic in, I'm going to go to the store the next time and get some garlic. And the same with any of this stuff. If you're missing something, it's probably going to taste bad. If you put too much of something, one thing or another in, it could have bad outcomes, and you don't want that to happen. So anyway, Tom Llewellyn, basil and GDP, don't forget, and basil and the economy. Next week, we're gonna talk about pesto and the virtuous cycle. It's why economies work. And literally, you'll get a new appreciation for pesto, but it'll be a little bit of a description between what the two proposals by the parties are, you know, federalist, capitalist, socialist, nationalist, and why one kind of doesn't work very well, and why it takes a great deal of energy to get back to things that do work. So anyway, we'll talk more next week. Thanks.